How's everybody doing today? Do we have any fans of trains here? I'm Travis Goodspeed. This is Fabienne Haas. We have been collaborating on some crazy projects for 15 years now. We once got kicked out of our own show at Paradiso in Amsterdam. We were kicked out by Prince, who never showed up. He had his people throw us out for him by announcing a surprise show that never happened.
True story.
We've been playing around with a lot of technologies. We began by collaborating on knitting machines. We're both ham radio operators and also play around with radios together.
And have been inadvertent roommates over the years.
I might have overstayed a couple of visas on her couch.
Maybe. Allegedly.
Allegedly overstayed. Our first project together is not the subject of this lecture, but it's pretty cool, so we're going to mention that first. The real subject of this lecture is a radio heist that we performed, in which we wanted to record a music show. We wanted like a soundboard recording, but we also didn't want to go to all the hassle of like going to the show. So we did it wirelessly from across town. Cool. Our initial project, our first collaboration, was called Multi-Threaded Banjo Dinosaur Knitting Adventure 2D Extreme.
It's very Googleable.
The idea was that we would knit a history into a tapestry like the Bayeux Tapestry that celebrates the Battle of Hastings. The problem is this doesn't have any adventures or any dinosaurs in it. So we figured we'd combine this with a video game and a kiosk where you could draw your own sprite in order to play that game.
We sourced a knitting machine in the north of Holland, and the lady was still knitting on it when we went and picked it up.
We worried that we were going to take this poor old woman's like very last knitting machine, that we were taking away her last hobby, and that she'd have nothing to do for the remainder of her years. And then we get there and she has 9 machines set up, all in various stages of projects.
Her husband is wearing 2 sweaters.
He was wearing 3. And it was one of those towns in North Holland where the house itself doesn't have a mailbox. They have like a collection for all of the ones on the street. And so we had to just knock on random doors and ask where the crazy lady with the knitting machine was, which is surprisingly easy to get across despite the language boundary.
Knitting machine in Dutch, by the way, is breimaschine, which I don't speak Dutch. I just speak German and French, so.
The word that matters. So the first thing that we did was we reverse engineered all of this machine. We took it apart, we figured out how the different buttons connected so that we could write a keyboard emulator. We found a disk emulator that was intended for the Radio Shack Trash 80 and happened to be compatible with this machine. So we were able to have a USB port on a computer pretending to be the floppy disk drive and the keyboard of the machine, and that allowed us to load in new patterns by a janky Python 2 script.
Because it was hacked, but it was not automated, and we needed that. So we added a little extra hardware on there, and then we made a cool knitting machine project where we had our avatar that we created, and then we built a video game with dinosaurs and banjos. Go, go, banjo dinosaur.
Go, go, banjo dinosaur.
He's fast.
He's bluegrass.
He's a banjo dinosaur.
We were also very sleep deprived for a week of working on this in Amsterdam and came up with crazy songs and stuff. The end of this was presented in Mediamatic Bank, which is an art museum. If you jump ahead one slide, these are some patrons of the museum playing the game. And as they play the game, we have these 4 RFID sensors, and they have to move their Dutch Metro card between the 4 sensors in order to move the character, up, down, left, or right. But they have to share the sensors, and the sensors will not allow both players to move in the same direction at the same time. And this allows you to tell so much about the people playing the game, because on a first date, or newlyweds, the fellow might say to the lady, excuse me, madam, but might you cease moving left, such that I might move left, as that would be amenable to my strategy within this endeavor.
But married couples would just jump all over each other and like slam the players back and forth. So
I wasn't able to capture it on film, but just a minute after this, the gentleman pushed the lady's hand out of the way and she dumped that beer on his head.
So the permanent winners panel was knit on a hack knitting machine and went all the way up to the ceiling and back down, showing who won with their avatar with the day that they won the video game.
Cool.
And in the ethos of somebody who likes to understand everything and just goes along for the ride, I'm going to talk about Betty Cantor Jackson. She was a hangers-on, a groupie, a member of practically the Grateful Dead. And she met them by stumbling into a house party in Haight-Ashbury and then started going around and recording everything that they did, even though they didn't really know that she was recording high-fidelity recordings of everything that they did, from 71 to 76. And she finally got on the payroll in 77. So there's all these really, really beautiful recordings of Grateful Dead concerts. Any Deadheads here? Oh, hard, tough crowd.
This became like a tradition that began to apply to other bands. So here we have the Internet Archive's collection of Grateful Dead shows from 1965 until 95. In some of these years, there are more than 1,000 unique recordings from their live performances.
So tapers were allowed at the Grateful Dead to stand behind the mixing board, sometimes even patch right into the mixing board at the Grateful Dead, and then later take those reel-to-reels, because they took a Nagra or whatever reel-to-reel recorder they had to the show, and then took it home, and then they started these tape trees where they would ship people cassette tape recordings of the concerts.
And this has continued for other bands, like I'm a big fan of the Silver Mountain Zion Memorial Orchestra and Tra-La-La Band with the Silver Mountain Zion Choir and Reverie, or whatever the hell their name is this year. And a lot of their shows are available from these live recordings from an album where the laptop was stolen and they gave up on the album and never finished it.
So not everybody was as forgiving as the Grateful Dead to tapers, and not everybody had a tapers section at their live show. One of the people who did not was Frank Zappa.
Snitch.
He went to the FBI to try to find tapers who were releasing his material early before his studio albums came out.
And what do you call going to the FBI when you're mad at someone? Snitching. Especially if it's nonviolent. Like, they were just recording his shows. They weren't committing acts of terror or things that you might legitimately want the authorities to step in for. So we wanted to do the same thing in the modern world, and we started joking about how this might be done and how we might use technology to help. For one thing, you can make very small recorders these days. For another thing, the reel-to-reel tapes kind of stretch a little. So if you want a stereo recording from multiple locations in the venue, you're not able to line them up if it's reel-to-reel because they'll drift and then you have to continuously recorrect it. With digital, you no longer have that problem. With GPS, you could align the two receivers. And then we realized we were overthinking it, and we didn't have to make any new hardware for this. We could just buy some shit and get the project over with.
So SDRs come in a bunch of flavors. SDR stands for Software Defined Radio, which I'm sure many of you have played with already. There's expensive ones, and there's cheap ones. And a software-defined radio allows you to tune into a frequency that it supports.
So the expensive one here is from Edis Research. This is about a $1,400 model. This is a very nice software-defined radio. It lets you do things like receive and transmit at the same time. It has an FPGA in it, so you can do the processing within the radio instead of having to do the processing externally in your laptop. There are some disadvantages to this as well, though. Like, because it's rather expensive, you might not want to just leave it sitting on the bar as you walk away. The cheaper model, the Realtek SDR, these are dirt cheap. I think when these first came out, I had a stack of 9 of them walking out of Saturn in Berlin, and they were only like €35 a piece. and the prices have gone down since then. They began as television receivers with like an SDR mode just so that they could receive FM without having to implement that in hardware.
Hello, train.
And the train comes back. Whichever of these you use, you don't need to understand the fancy math behind them. You don't need to write custom software for them. There are excellent programs available in the form of SDR++ and SDR Sharp. If you're on Windows, the only good things you have are debuggers and SDR Sharp. So take advantage of that and use the better SDR software.
So you need antennas, but those are easy to come by, and then you need the software.
And then the final thing that you need is like, it really helps to prototype this stuff away from a real concert, because a real concert is a fixed amount of time and you have other things to do, like listen to the music. So we bought one. What we bought was not the equipment that runs the speakers. We bought an in-ear monitor.
In-ear monitors used to be only for very, very fancy concerts, so like big stadium shows with Celine Dion, or as we say in French, Céline Dion. And they were the sort of things where she would have the wireless in-ear monitors, but your local band at your local venue wouldn't have wireless in-ear monitors. But now they're so cheap that they're prevalent everywhere.
So this would be used for one musician in the band to hear the rest of the band playing in order to match timing with them.
So each member of the band has maybe a different mix that they're listening to. So the lead singer maybe has more of the drummer and the bass, and then the bassist has mostly the drummer. And it's basically on the preference of each band member what they want in their mix of their in-ear monitor.
So once we have the hardware, we can test it out. We can set up our software-defined receiver. We can set up our transmitter. We can tune our receiver to the frequency that is helpfully shown on the transmitter. But in a real show, you can't do that, because in a real show, you don't necessarily have the right to look at the frequency on the box without the bouncers grabbing you, throwing you off the stage, and beating you up. The way around this is that you can look at the FCC regulations. These devices initially began on the 700 megahertz band. In 2010, that got taken away, and that equipment still exists, and those frequencies still work. They're now just dedicated to other things. So if you use these frequencies for one show, you will probably get away with it. If you use them repeatedly, some snitch-ass motherfucker like Frank Zappa
Snitch.
will rat you out to the FCC, and then on account of that snitching, they'll show up and they'll tell you to please stop using that frequency because it's needed for other things. So the result of this is that other frequencies got taken over. 2.4, 5.8, and 900 megahertz are good targets for this because they're rather unregulated. Fubs and I both have licenses for using 900 megahertz for amateur radio.
73s to K7FP.
But it's sort of understood that you're going to have a lot of interference there. And the sound monitor that we purchased runs in that band because, for regulatory reasons, nobody cares. Other frequencies that are handy include what used to be used for UHF television. I'm sure that half of you are too young to remember this, but there used to be television channels with numbers, and they used to refer to the frequency that it would be broadcast through the air without cables or the internet or streaming. And
very rudimentary antennas that look like a joke.
Yeah, we'd actually have antennas on top of the TV, and you'd have to send your unloved siblings to go and adjust them during the show, and you'd yell at them whenever the signal got worse, and you'd pretend that them standing in like a crazy way would make the signal better when it didn't. In any case,
some of these are attainable outside of a venue, and some of them are really local to the venue because they don't have a lot of reach.
Right. So these old TV channels, 470 to 512 megahertz, they're pretty good for range. 900 megahertz will get through brickwork a little bit better than that. 2.4 gigahertz will not. It's also interfered with by Wi-Fi. So if they're using 2.4 gigahertz, we don't get a good audio signal because as we're receiving, local Wi-Fi around us will interfere with it.
And
it will
microwaves.
just happily stomp over that channel.
Those science ovens.
Goddamn science oven is stealing our vitamins. One way to tell what frequency you have is to snap a picture of the transmitter, of the receiver instead of the transmitter. So this particular model, the AS950R, is running at 470 megahertz. If you can see it and then look it up on your phone, you then know what frequency it'll be. You can also look up other brands. So like this one is 2.4 gig, and that would be rather bad for our purposes. But going back to these frequency bands, you only need to check these frequencies. And when you're receiving a signal, the length of your antenna and how well it matches to the transmitter is a lot less important than when you're transmitting. Which means that you can hop around and you can check all of these ranges until you find one that has the show you want to listen to, and then you've got the show.
You've got a laptop, you've got a cheap SDR, you've got a cheap antenna, and you know what frequencies to look for. So I told Travis in 2023, I said, there's this concert I really want to go to. There's this band I really love called Colony House. And he said, pardon me, what?
I figured we should go, but there were some problems with this. Like, his show is kind of loud, it's kind of crowded.
We hadn't caught up for a while.
You want to have a good conversation sometimes, and you also want to hear the music. And at this venue, they sometimes have chairs outside, and you can use the chairs in order to sit and have a conversation outside of the show, but then you still kind of miss the show. So we figured we'd do better. And the location of this show might be familiar to you. If you look in this photograph, you might sort of see like some brickwork and some windows. This was at a venue called the Mill and Mine. And we looked this up on satellite photography, doing all the James Bond shit. And just behind the Mill and Mine is this bar called the Public House.
Very neighborly bar.
And the stage of the Mill and Mine that we are standing on right now, the Colony House was standing on back in September, that happens to be just across that alley from the patio at the Public House, where you can sit outside and enjoy the nice weather and do some radio shit.
Beautiful spot. Yes.
So we gathered all of our gear. We needed 2 laptops for this because there are multiple signals, and even if there is a best one, you want to be able to check out the second best one while recording the show from the better feed. We brought antennas that we mounted on the fence.
It has a very nice metal fence, which makes a very nice ground plane for an antenna. Oh. Worked out great.
So we mount the antenna up, run the cables to the laptops, begin hunting around, and eventually we found the right frequencies.
And this is the shot of me finding the right frequency. You can see by the look on my face, I'm about to have a very good rock show experience.
The other great thing about this was that we were just in like a half-empty beer bar, so we had some nice beer. We didn't have to wait in line for drinks. This is my obligatory reminder that you should all tip your bartenders. It does not matter that you're using drink tickets. In fact, if you're using drink tickets, do you tip more or less than you normally would? More! Great. All right. So this was the signal that we caught. It came in at 471.95 megahertz. One of the complications of the Realtek SDR is that its oscillator is not very reliable, which means that having 2 laptops and 2 receivers, we could never quite agree on which frequency the signal was on. Like, one laptop would always show a little higher than the other, and that made it difficult for us to agree on which channel was which. It involved a lot of like swapping headphones back and forth and looking at relative distances, like is this above or below the other signal?
And we were wearing headphones, so we weren't bothering the other bar patrons as well. I just want to say, be polite.
It would have been really fun to take over the Bluetooth, though. This is the first recording. So we started this before the show actually began. And before a show begins, there's like a warm-up period, and you need to make sure that all of your sound is in order. And so the first thing that came through is this.
Something happening? Sorry, no, I'm just tuning. Oh, okay, I could hear like clicking. It sounded like you're like punching through pedals. It was a song.
So
looks like 4 bars on this microphone. Do we go ahead and change? Or? Nah, that's fine. That's cool. It'll last like four or 5 shows on. All right. Here comes. Great. And then good.
So this is the band talking back and forth to the live audio engineer at the show. And we recorded that from sitting at the bar behind that brick wall over there.
You folks can't see it from where you're sitting, but Andrew, our lovely technical director, is glaring at me right now.
We did not tell him about these shenanigans ahead of time, so thank you for letting us do the grand reveal.
So before things begin, you wind up hearing like a lot of the audience noise in the background with a bit of the sound checks overlaid on it. And then pretty soon you begin hearing more than that.
We're doing all right, Knoxville.
This is Knoxville.
We're calling the house from Nashville. It's good to be back, y'all. I could lately, and the world keeps moving faster.
So this screenshot here, is of one of the wave recordings that we made. We took this from 2 of the sound monitor feeds for the entirety of the show. You can see at the very beginning I had a little trouble with figuring out the right levels to record it, but the vast majority of this is almost studio quality. And the only limitations on that are the quality of the radio, the quality of the antenna, and the quality of the signal. So long as you have a good receiver and a good line of sight to the transmitter, even if a thin little brick wall is in the way, you can capture everything that you need in order to hear the entire show without physically entering the venue, and you can get...
and record it for yourself for later.
Now, it's at this point that I need to offer a little bit of legal advice. Even though I am not an attorney, I suggest that you do not do this for that snitch-ass Frank Zappa's concerts.
I would also like to note that I have a lovely employer, but this has nothing to do with what I do with my employer, and they do not condone this behavior.
Frank Zappa's behavior?
No.
Obviously, none of us condone that. Oh, he is. Oh, not recently, I hope. Oh, thank God. Okay, so at this point, we are going to make a sacrifice to the demo gods in honor of our friend Felix Lindner.
Who's still alive, don't worry. Hi, FX.
FX, if you're out there, we wish you well, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you
Cheers.
for the lulz, friend.
I do wish that he drank tastier drinks. All right, so let's see how this works. I'm gonna, here we go.
Think good thoughts for the demo, y'all.
All righty. Okay, so as you open up the software, SDR Sharp, SDR++, a couple of competing tools, you're given a band display. And as you start powering it up, you begin seeing the actual signal. It's saying that this is the 33 centimeter amateur band, and that is true. But of course, we all know that it's illegal to transmit music in amateur radio. So we are making this transmission as unlicensed operators. And if there are any Frank Zappas in the room, don't bother snitching about this because the FCC doesn't care. My receiver happens to be very close to the transmitter. So I'm seeing multiple aliases of the original signal. When you're at a distance, you won't see this. When you're at a distance, you'll see pretty much just the original transmission and none of these aliases. The important pieces to find are you need to choose the right frequency. So I can slide this around. I can pick either the original signal or one of the aliases. I'm going to go with this alias here because it looks particularly clean. And then the other thing you need is to choose how wide this would be. So if it's too narrow, because this is an FM signal, the volume will be maxed out and everything will sound really clipped and ugly. On the other hand, if the reason you want wide deviation is that the wider the signal is, the more quality there is. For music, we need a lot more quality than we would need for a ham radio communication. If I were to take my handheld radio like this and I'm having a conversation, I can have that across town or across East Tennessee, but I'm not going to do it with as much width as this signal, as that would be wasteful. And then the only remaining thing to do is to tap into our transmitter and to see what kind of music we have. Sing along, everybody.
This is live, y'all. We're live rickrolling you through an SDR picked up that we're transmitting. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ken.
Ah, the demo gods. They smiled upon us today.
Alrighty. This is the transmitter that we were using. If you want to pick one of these up for yourself, it's like 150 on Amazon for a base model. Do keep in mind that the cheaper ones like we purchased will be at different frequencies than the ones that professionals use. In our case, our own unit was running at around 908 megahertz. The one that was used in the concert was around 471 megahertz. If you were to extend this, if you wanted to do like other sorts of shows or a wider variety of them, you could imagine setting up like a permanent base camp near a venue. Like, set up a recording box that would run at the public house every evening, collect all of the shows. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple in that a lot of the touring acts bring their own equipment. And the diversity of that equipment means that you're gambling on whether or not you will receive a particular show. We happened to catch the Colony House show because it used the right equipment and they had the sound monitors and our radio could handle those frequencies and the frequencies would go through the wall. If they had used wired monitors, we would not have caught anything because the wired monitors don't transmit their signal more than an inch by near field. So they're not going to go across the street. Similarly, if they used 2.4 gigahertz, the Wi-Fi in the bar that we were at, and maybe the microwave oven in their kitchen, although I sincerely hope their kitchen is better than that, would create interference with our signal and we wouldn't have gotten any quality in our recording. We'd found that we've not seen many of these monitors using digital, which would complicate reception, but is not a problem for this sort of work, because digital radio, while it provides interference robustness and it provides more efficient bandwidth usage, and all of these great benefits, it's really bad for latency. If you remember how landline telephones had less latency than your cell phone does, it's the same reason. The little section of audio needs to be compressed before it can be transmitted in digital radio, and that sort of a delay can break the timing of the band so that they're not able to keep up with one another, and it becomes the musical equivalent of when you're in a bad teleconference and you start hearing an echo of your own voice delayed by just a little bit, and you want to throw the computer against the wall, give up Zoom, and become a farmer. Good.
This is not the opinion of my employer. Yeah, so you can see here we're live transmitting from the transmitter. It would normally go to an in-ear monitor receiver, but Travis is picking it up with an SDR.
You can unplug it.
He's picking it up with an SDR that's plugged into his laptop with a tiny antenna.
This is also good as a beginner project. Like, we've not written any code here, we've not written any new software. All that it required was taking some cheap gear and a couple of laptops out to a bar and having a good evening of conversation and music.
So yeah, now you can have high fidelity recordings of all your favorite bands as they come through town, and you get to sit in a nice table in the bar behind the venue.
Cool. Conclusions or questions?
So to wrap up, what have we learned here today?
That it does not say RSVP on the Constitution.
Thank you, Cher. Any questions?
Yep. We got a question in the front row. I'll pass you the mic.
Are you aware of any features trying to prevent what you were able to do in any of this gear, or is it obscure enough that nobody's even bothering?
Currently, most of it is unencrypted and it's completely in the clear.
Historically, there were scrambling methods that would protect an analog signal against casual interception. They seem to have largely been forgotten about because the digital methods of protecting a signal are so much more effective. And then here, the digital techniques aren't relevant because we're not dealing with a digital signal. So it's this weird mix where, like, we're using an analog technology, and previously we knew how to defend that analog technology against interception, but we've lost that knowledge because it hasn't been relevant since cable TV became digital in the 90s.
And yeah, just another caveat, it is legal to listen. It's not necessarily legal to transmit.
So long as it is not a cordless telephone call within the boundaries of the United States.
So don't send noise over your favorite bands in your monitors, please.
Oh, right. So there's one other piece to this, which is when you have these monitors, and when the soundboard operator is doing a sound check with the band, and they're going back and forth and talking to each other, it being wireless, there is nothing other than the capture effect that prevents you from jumping in on that. So if your celebrity crush were on the stage and you wanted to say, "Oh my God, your show's so awesome, or hopefully something more meaningful, you could do that by transmitting over the original signal, so long as you did it with roughly the same deviation and more power as viewed from the receiver. So across the street would be rather hard in that we would need a lot of power, but if you were in the venue and you had a handheld radio modified to do wideband instead of narrow, you could just sort of key up and transmit and say, "Oh my God, I think your show's so awesome, thank you so much." And the band would then say, "Who the hell is this and why the hell am I talking to you?" instead of the...
Where's my audio engineer?
Yeah.
So I want to give a shout out to all the audio engineers of the world.
And especially a thanks to Andrew for
Thank
not
you,
cutting us
Andrew.
off in the middle of this lecture.
Thanks for letting us continue when we told you that we pirated your venue. Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. We hope you had a good day, and we'll see you around.